Great. Well, we're going to continue the conversation that we've been having today on social and cultural norms that underlie the acceptance of violence. I'm Colleen Scanlon. I'm one of the original members of the sponsors of the forum. In my real-world job, I'm lead the advocacy and violence prevention programs for a large faith-based healthcare system called Catholic Health Initiatives. So I'm really excited to be facilitating, moderating this panel on the role of religion in influencing social and cultural norms. I think we all know that faith communities and religious leaders can have a significant and influential status and role, and they can influence values, norms, perceptions, and behaviors, both negatively and positively. So we have two highly qualified speakers with us today, Pauline Muchina, and her bio is in your materials, and Kapia Keoma, and his bio is not in your materials, but you can get a lot of information on him if you Google him. But let me just say a few things to introduce him. He's a scholar, a pastor, and an activist for international human rights. He's a visiting researcher at Boston University and an adjunct professor at Episcopal Divinity School. He's a frequent lecturer, and he is a pretty prolific author as well. And I'm sure he may say a few other things about his role. So let me start. Each of our speakers, as we've done before, will have a time for their remarks, and then we'll open it up for our own conversation and discernment as we talk about the influence of religion on culture and social norms. Pauline?
Good afternoon. Wow, people are asleep. It's the afternoon. Wake up. Good afternoon. I am so pleased to be with you in this room. When I look around, I see people who have been in this battlefield for years and years and have made a lot of changes around the world. And I'm just humbled that I even have the opportunity to be here. And I want to say thank you to the committee that organized, and especially to Evelyn for recommending me to be part of this conversation. I'm supposed to talk about an overview of the intersection of religion, social norms, and gender equality. Each of these terms is a whole topic by itself. Actually, people have spent years and years just dealing with one part of it. So I may not be able to do justice to each one of them, or even to one of them. But I will speak from my own experience as an African woman and also as a theologian. And I have also chosen the most commonly agreed upon definitions of some of these terms, so at least we have a working definition of each when we are thinking about it. So according to Wikipedia, a religion is an organized collection of beliefs, cultural systems, and worldviews that relate to humanity, to an order of existence. Many religions have narratives, symbols, and sacred histories that aim to explain the meaning of life, the origin of life, or the universe. This is the definition given by other dictionaries or other scholars, such as Oxford Dictionary or Webster's, or feminist theologies, or liberation theology. The term social norms, as we saw this morning, has very, very diverse understanding. But I picked one, which you also heard about this morning, and that one is social norms are informal understandings that govern individuals' behavior in society. In other words, a social norm is acceptable behavior expected from an individual in a particular group, community, or culture. Usually these norms lay the foundation for correct behavior. How many people in this room feel like they are social deviants? I do, all the time. The term gender equality. According to UN Women, gender equality refers to the equal rights, responsibilities, and opportunities of women and men and girls and boys. Equality does not mean that women and men will become the same, but that women's and men's rights, responsibilities, and opportunities will not depend on whether they are born male or female. So how do all these three come together, or how do they intersect? Please allow me to use my own African context to explain my understanding of these intersections. I agree with scholars who have concluded that religion is a powerful force that influences social norms in a particular setting. From when I was a young kid, I recognized the impact of religion on women and girls' life in my own life. And I saw the negative impact, and I also saw the positive impact. At that early age, about age 9, I decided to become a theologian so that I could explore religion and understand how I could change it. At that age, I thought I could change religion to empower women instead of disempowering women. Years later, I did my dissertation research in Kenya and confirmed what I knew all along. Religion has a positive and negative impact in our lives. The consequences of its negative impact are horrific, and it is time to stop them. John Mbiti, a famous Kenyan scholar, says, religion is by far the richest part of the African heritage. It is found in all areas of human lives. It shapes our cultures, social, political, and economic lives. Religion in Africa is bound with the traditional way of life. I want you to remember the last part of this quote. Religion in Africa is bound with the traditional way of life. This way of life is governed by rituals and moral values displayed in social norms. For generations, religion has been the lens in which Africans view the world. Religion is integrated into all aspects of life, such that in most African languages, we don't even have a word for religion. Religion is who you are. You are born into it, and your initiation starts even before you are conceived, and it continues to afterlife. It is found in ceremonies, festivals, art, dance, music, rituals, proverbs, riddles, wise saying, people's names and places, myths and legends. In the African context, there is general agreement that the world was created by God. Even with the rise of secularism around the world, most Africans believe that the world was created by God. This is not something you argue about. And no matter how educated you are, you just have to accept it. Different myths in Africa exist of how God created everything. In Africa, oral cultures, myths embody philosophical reflections, express values, and identity moral standards. Taboos exist to maintain moral order of the visible and invisible worlds. African religions are very pragmatic. And religion in Africa is divided into five key areas: beliefs, practices, ceremonies, and festivals. So beliefs is 1, practices, ceremony, and festival is 2, objects and places is 3, religious officials and leaders is 4, values and morals is 5. And I will dwell a little bit on the moral values. In Africa, social norms and religious moral values and beliefs are interchangeable. When social norms and religious traditions and practices become one, what happens? Most of the time, it is hard to distinguish where a religious value ends and where a social norm begins. Religion significantly affects the way men and women interact in society, in homes, in institutions. Religion tries to regulate the role of women and men in certain aspects of social and political life in a given society. And historically, many African communities hold gender inequalities, which are supported by their religion and culture. Many African myths of creation and oral tradition demonstrate gender equality and balance of relationship. However, somewhere along the way, we lost it. And there are recent myths that show how we lost that balance, which we can go back to later. But let us take a few examples of the impact these moral values have acted to impact women's lives. Millions of women have succumbed to death or are living in fear due to religious ideologies that relegate them to second-class citizens and required by religious edict that they be treated as slaves. Due to cultural and religious gender norms, African women and girls lack the ability or lack the social and economic power to control their bodies. Their bodies don't belong to them. That's why you hear so much about human sexuality and how people should be relating to one another, and all based on traditions or religious tradition, teachings, and practices, and they impact us both negatively and positively. Not surprisingly, African women and girls are now at the center of the HIV epidemic. Women in Africa continue to be survivors of discrimination and harmful practices, practices such as female genital mutilation, bride price, domestic violence, honor killings, punishing women adulterers, killing of women witches, and rape in time of armed conflict and other settings, kidnapping, trafficking of women and girls, and transgenerational sex. All of this have their basis in religious customs and tradition. Can you believe it? And you would argue, and many people have argued, that they don't have their basis there. But I would argue that they do, and we will look more how that is. Exclusion from decision-making processes, including leadership, politics, and economic strategies, persist not only in religious institutions, but in society. I have never heard such noise from a group of people opposing women's leadership as religious leaders. Maybe you haven't, but if you're listening carefully to the presidential debate in the United States, you would also question the issue of separation of religion and state, you know. Anyway, I'm just saying. Domestic violence and religious and cultural rituals have claimed the lives of many women. Its origins lies in a man's right to assert his authority over a woman, a notion instilled in many religious interpretation of scriptures and traditions. All world religions today maintain male social dominance with social structures. Patriarchy governs. Women and girls feel religious institutions and are religious devotees, but in many religious traditions, they are not allowed to lead. Through scriptures and practices, religious tradition continue to perpetuate gender inequality and gender-based violence. Some scholars argue that it is interpretation of religious texts that poses a problem. I believe it is more than interpretation. Let's look at a few examples. In the Jewish tradition, especially in the Orthodox Jewish tradition, there is an everyday blessing which goes like this. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has not made me a woman. In Buddhism, a woman is not capable of reaching enlightenment or becoming a Buddha. Last month, the Dalai Lama quipped that if the next Buddha is a female, she has to be very, very attractive. In Hinduism, women are venerated as mothers, but they have no rights to property or divorce rights. And the tradition or the custom of sati, the practice of widow's immolation, is practiced in some communities. In Islam, Quran verse 4, verse 34, which refers to men as guardians, has been used to justify gender roles and male privilege over women. Women are often expected to be obedient wives and mothers, staying within the family environment. And men are expected to be the protectors and caretakers of the family. In case you think that I'm only criticizing other traditions, in my own Christian tradition, Christianity, it is worse. In addition to the two creation story, one of which puts man above, man first and the woman second, some teachings, both in the Old and New Testament, are outright offensive to women and anybody who cares about justice. For example, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 23, "For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body and is himself its Savior." Colossians chapter 3, verse 18, "Wives, be submissive yourself to your husband as is fitting in the Lord." What does that mean? These texts have encouraged the exclusion of women from leadership in the family, church, and society. A lot of problems that happen in marriage where men are demanding obedience from women comes from texts like this. And the church, when they marry people, I don't know whether you've heard in my own tradition, the Anglican church, where I grew up, they would say that the woman, you promise to obey the husband. Right? But that wasn't required of the man. I believe this is a religious war that the traditions have been carrying against women, and they have gone unchallenged for generations. Even with the upcoming of feminist theologies, Mujerista theology, womanist theology, African women liberation theology, we have still not even made a dent in really addressing the issue of discrimination and gender-based violence perpetuated by religious traditions. At the UN, you will be surprised. They are supposed to be making decisions that are above all religions. But what I heard the most for many years that I worked there or I went for meetings, it is when it came to sexual and reproductive health, when it came to gender equality, when it came to human sexuality, it is not our culture. It is not our religion. And then they would sit in a room and make decisions, not based on human rights, but based on their cultures and what? And what? So is there a separation of religion and states? Most of the laws that have been have been passed, such as the Beijing Platform for Action, the Millennium Development Goal, sustainable goals now, and it's only the names that are changing. In reality, we're still dealing with the same issues. The toughest obstacles is religious faiths and traditions and institutions, some of whom have a seat at the UN. The war against access to sexual and reproductive health services is perpetuated by religious organizations, while we have over 200 million women dying because of lack of access to family planning. How can they go on like this without being held accountable? If we dismiss the role of religion in what we are saying and in what we are working for, we fail miserably. They do influence the way we think. They do influence the way we behave towards each other, and particularly they influence how women are treated in the homes, in the society, in places of work. Although there are policies in place, those policies are not being implemented because of people's beliefs. Just recently, there was an attorney from, was it Kentucky, who refused to give certificates, to gay couples because of her religious faith. Yeah, Kim Davis, thank you. She got away with it. She went to jail, but she came out. Why is there not an outcry that you cannot use your religious convictions to force me to behave the way you want me to behave? as we lose millions of women and children needlessly due to lack of access to family planning, I wonder why we don't protest, not only against the Catholic Church, but against all other religious institutions that promote gender inequality. My first sexual assault, attempted sexual assault, was by a bishop, and thank God I was strong enough to push him away. He got away with it. He got away with it. We hold perpetrators accountable. Why are we not doing it in the church? We are now bringing priests to account for sexually assaulting boys. Why haven't we held the church, the religious traditions, accountable for generating and perpetuating gender discrimination and violence against women and girls over the ages? Why is it that we hold groups that are discriminating accountable for their discrimination, but we can't hold religious organizations accountable? Why? Maybe we have focused too much on policies and laws, and we have failed to hold people accountable so that we can prevent more women and girls from dying because of religious traditions and practices that perpetuate gender-based violence and gender-based discrimination. I'm out of time, but I know we'll have more time for conversation. So I just want to say, in conclusion, please listen to women theologians. They are doing something important, but they've been dismissed a lot in their movement because they come from religious tradition. They chose to stay. Like myself, why do we stay? We believe that we can change the institution from within. And some of us have, But it's the same question. Why do women stay in abusive situations? Why don't they walk away? So instead of asking those questions, how do we join hands with them to promote the theology that they are doing to change the way religious institutions impact women in a negative way? Thank you.